Okay, I think we're live. Uh, I believe we're live, but why don't you, if you're logged in now, let me know that you're there by just typing hi, your name, maybe just your first name's okay, and maybe where you're from. That's always interesting because we have quite a few people signed up for this webinar, and like to see where you all are from, different parts of the world. So that's always pretty cool. So while we wait for everyone to get signed in, go ahead and type in the chat box and let me know. And I'll be looking over here and taking a look. Okay, Hugo from Mexico, great. Mexico, we have a lot of people from Mexico interested in this topic usually. Let's see, Colombia, great. Grand Rapids, Michigan, know it well. Mutual of Omaha, Nebraska. Great. My family's from Iowa, just right across the border. So know Omaha pretty well. Canada, welcome. Pennsylvania, Roger. Ravi from the USA. Wow, pretty big place. Roberto from Peru, bienvenido. Okay, wonderful. Pennsylvania. Chile, Walter from Chile. También bienvenido. Boca Raton, I was just in West Palm Beach recently, so no Boca. South Carolina, Orlando, again, I spent the last few months actually in West Palm Beach, so familiar with Florida in the winter. Belgium, welcome, staying up a little bit later. Glad you could make it. Argentina, my partner, Esteban, my partner Gerard is from Buenos Aires. North Carolina, Mark from Phoenix, Meade, Colorado. That's very close to where we are, Jamie. I'm in beautiful Boulder, Colorado. So just I don't know, maybe half hour car ride from where you are. Honolulu, welcome, beautiful place. Atlanta, Jeff from Michigan. Aloha, Redley must be from Hawaii as well. Yvonne from New Jersey, Eric from the UK. Welcome, Eric. Okay, so I'm looking at the clock here. We got a lot to cover, so let's dispense with the niceties and let's get going. My name is Richard Ron. I put my name up here on the board. I'm going to try something a little bit different in this webinar. I'm just going to treat this as a conversation. So I'm talking to you. You can actually post questions as you go along. I don't know that I'll always notice them, but we do have some other folks looking over my shoulder and, well, not literally over my shoulder, but they'll be watching the screen. And so if you have questions, I'll either get to them during this webinar or we'll try to get to your questions after the webinar. Leon from Mexico, bienvenido. And Brazil, Luis. So my name is Richard Ron. I've been doing this kind of work, lean, in the world of lean for quite a long time. In fact, when I started, I had dark brown hair, and you can see, so the years have gone by, but it's still exciting, and it still continues to evolve. It's still really a very exciting thing to be involved in. Not tired of it, and but I've had the chance over the years to work with a lot of companies. It's just been a great experience, from small organizations to some of the biggest in the world. And currently, I mean, we're still obviously active. Currently, for some reason, a lot of American/Japanese companies have chosen to work with us. So we have clients like Mitsubishi, and we're partners with Toyota and Hitachi and companies like that. It's kind of strange how that's happened, but we also have some great, very classic American companies in our portfolio of clients that we're currently working with, including companies like John Deere. So I've had a chance to see a lot of different industries and a lot of different companies over the years, and hopefully some of that will come through, and I can share some of that. Okay, Vinay from India, great. So all over the world, it's really amazing, actually, that we can do something like this and have this kind of conversation. So I'm going to be just kind of talking, not exactly off the top of my head, but pretty informally. I'm not scripted. Here's the only script I have. I have some bullets that I want to talk to, but it's a very exciting topic. And so I'm really excited to be able to share this with you as well, and look forward to your feedback. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to, about halfway through or somewhere through this presentation, we're going to offer you a chance to download a gift. So it's worth, on Amazon, worth about $50. So $50 gift. So this is like a legal bribe to get you to stick around. And at the end, you'll be getting an opportunity to save $500 on another offer. So I'm just going to be sticking these little Post-it notes up here as reminders and kind of keep track of how we're doing. I don't know if you can see that on your computers or not, but I have a series of little Post-it notes that I'll be using to keep track of this. So let's get going. The title was How to Do Kaizen Without BSing and Hoping. So let's define some terms. So you're probably familiar with the word Kaizen, very common word. So continuous improvement or good thinking in Japanese, but we translate it as basically continuous improvement or the effort to improve. Now, what do we mean by BS? Well, BS is an acronym, right? It's an abbreviation, and this is a family show, so I won't tell you what the actual term is. But what we mean by that, what we mean by no BS, is Kaizen without data. So doing a Kaizen with no data-driven approach, and we'll talk about what the option would be for that. So Kaizen with no data would be BS, and at least the way we're defining it. You can take exception to that. And then the other part of this webinar title was hoping. So no hoping. So hoping means no metrics, no way of measuring. So we're doing something that we think is an improvement, and it might be an improvement, but we have no way of measuring the results. So that would be hoping for the best, but we can't actually confirm it. So I'm going to take this little Post-it note. So Kaizen, we define that. BS is no data. Hope is no metrics. And I'll just put it up here on the board. Now, there are a couple other terms I want to talk about. I want to drill down a little bit on the term Kaizen, because there are different types of Kaizen. So one of the say the simplest forms of Kaizen is what we might call, or what we do call, quick and easy Kaizen. And we use that term because it was used in a book called The Idea Generator by Norman Bodek. It's one of the books in our library that we like, that we pull down often and look at. So The Idea Generator, Norman Bodek. And it's basically a suggestion system. So it's one form of Kaizen. So many lean companies, maybe yours, encourage employees to come up with small improvement ideas, and these are recorded and then hopefully are implemented quickly, in an effort to spread the wealth and take advantage of the talent that you have within that company. So that is what we might call quick and easy. We call it quick and easy because those types of ideas are easy to think up. We're not trying to think of grandiose big ideas, and they're easy to get approved. So approval is important to avoid the law of unintended consequences. And these ideas are easy to implement. So typically, the person that suggested the idea would implement that idea by himself or herself, or locally in a small team. So this is how you get a lot of these small ideas implemented. So that's one kind of Kaizen. Next kind of Kaizen is a Kaizen event. So this is where you have something a little bit bigger in scope, but not huge, and you carve out 3, 4, 5 days, and you form a team. And the idea here is to get something done in a short period of time, and not just from a planning point of view, but implemented in a short period of time. So you can't be overly ambitious, but it's amazing how much you can get done in a very short period of time. So that's a Kaizen event. And some companies actually schedule Kaizen events, maybe yours, throughout the year. So you know that every month or every quarter, there's going to be a Kaizen event, and you may have a chance to be a member of that team. And those are typically a lot of work, but also a lot of fun. So these are Kaizen events, and usually amazing what can get done. Now, there's a third kind of Kaizen, and we don't even use the word Kaizen all the time, but there is another Japanese word that I'm going to use or introduce you to called kaikaku. So kaikaku means a radical change, or big change, and so it's certainly an improvement, but it's at the level of a project, and it's probably too big to get done within 3 days or 4 days or 5 days, although these kind of projects can be broken into pieces and address that way, and we'll talk about that. So Kaikaku is really the biggest, most ambitious level of this type of Kaizen, okay, or improvement. So I'll put these three up here. Now, why are we talking about this? Well, there's a book you probably have heard of called Toyota Kata. Great book, another one of these great books that we like to refer to. And I think it's on page 179, if I recall correctly. There's a mention that a study was done at Toyota in Japan to try to figure out where are the benefits coming from of improvement, of continuous improvement. And they were looking at the quick and easy Kaizen, looking at Kaizen events, and then bigger projects. And they determined that 90%, that's not 90, in other words, the vast majority of the hard dollar benefits, the kind of benefits you can actually see on your profit and loss statement and attribute to those efforts, 90% of those benefits came from Kaikaku type projects. In other words, engineering driven or management driven larger projects. Now, that shouldn't be a total surprise, but what was a surprise to me was just how big that percentage was. So 90% is Kaikaku and 10% were the smaller individual suggestions. In fact, I mentioned we spend quite a bit of time at Toyota Material Handling in Columbus, Indiana, and we had this conversation with them because they have a suggestion program. And they said, you know, we don't even look for quantifiable benefits necessarily with our suggestion program. We don't ask people to jump through hoops and justify the hard dollar savings for every small idea that comes up, because we regard the quick and easy Kaizen or the suggestion system as part of our employee development or human development of getting people to start thinking in terms of improvement and looking at the work they're doing and coming up with small ideas. Because if people can do that, then the next step would be to widen their scope and start looking at maybe their area or their department and eventually evolve and grow into the ability to really be a leader in this area. So they regard it as part of their respect for people or human development effort as much as anything, although they do get financial benefit out of it, but it's not the primary goal. So 90% is Kaikaku. So if that's the case, then clearly our Kaizen or improvement efforts really needs to be heavily slanted in that direction. Although we're not discounting quick and easy Kaizen or Kaizen events, but really the benefits are going to come from thinking bigger and bigger projects. Okay, so with that, let me tell you a couple stories that relate to this issue, and then we can expand. So story number one, I went to a conference a few years ago. This was probably 10 years ago, I would say. And it was a large aerospace company. They had about 30,000 employees. So this is one of the bigger ones. And they had embraced lean in a big way about 5 or 6 years before that, before this event. This was hosted at their site, by the way, at their plant. So part of the agenda was a presentation by the CEO, and he gave a talk on their lean journey. And what he said was, you know, we started out with a lot of enthusiasm, and especially enthusiasm for this idea of Kaizen. So we conducted a lot of Kaizen events, meaning the 3 to 5 day type of format, in a lot of different areas, a lot of different departments, and we did over 600. I mean, this is a big company, right? But over 600 Kaizen events over a 3-year period. But the problem was this. Every Kaizen event was a success, apparently, right? There would be a report out, and we did this improvement, we did that improvement. It all sounded great. But when I looked at the profit and loss statements and, you know, looked at my balance sheet, et cetera, and, you know, looked at trends over the years, I couldn't really see the benefit. He said, I don't have any doubt that improvements were made. I just couldn't see it, in the financial statements. It wasn't that obvious. It wasn't that different from what it was from our performance before in terms of our profitability, you know, our margins, all that stuff didn't change dramatically. So what we're going to do, or what we need to make some changes, because obviously we were spending a lot of money on this. We wanted to see those improvements. One of the changes he made, which is interesting, and it's a little bit off topic, but he required each of the leaders in his direct reporting staff, his VPs, to be able to teach lean topics like 5S, like the 7 wastes, like et cetera, all the lean, basic lean tools, because he realized that his direct reports, who were supposed to be leading this lean effort, really weren't that knowledgeable. They were able to give lip service, the BS part of it. They were able to give lip service to lean, but they didn't really understand what it was all about. And as you know, if you have to teach something to someone, you really have to understand it at a deeper level. And he said, so that was a big improvement, because he wasn't turning his VPs into trainers, but he wanted to make sure that they could teach these subjects and had them do it periodically. So that made a big difference just by itself. And then also focusing on this idea of kaikaku, so metrics, and really taking a higher look at what kinds of things were being worked on, as opposed to a shotgun approach, make improvements all over the place. So clearly he was there, he was inviting us in, because then that's when he started seeing actual changes on the financial statements and actually seeing the results of their efforts in terms of their profitability, their margins, their lead time to their customers, their backlogs, etc. So that's one story. The other story is this. There's an article, I was thinking of giving you the link to this, but you can find it very easily. If you go into Google and you just do a Google search on, did Toyota fool the lean community? And what you're going to see there, I think it comes right to the top of the list, is a slide presentation by a couple guys over in Belgium. I think they were in Europe. And they had a very interesting, little presentation. It's actually about 80 slides. But what they were saying was, in this presentation, based on research they did and readings they did from Taiichi Ohno, interviews later in life with Taiichi Ohno at Toyota. And what Taiichi Ohno said was, in these interviews, was, we'd come up with this approach to improvement, to Kaizen, but I was concerned that if we kind of give away the farm and tell too much, then our competitors, and primarily he was concerned with European and North American competitors, are going to take these ideas and become more formidable competitors to us. So we knew that we couldn't keep this secret. It's a big word. But what we wanted to do was kind of throw people off the scent. There's a term for that, red herring. You got the bloodhound and you have a fish, and you swipe the fish and send the dog off the track. And the way that Taiichi Ohno did this was he convinced people that the essence of lean was elimination of waste. And you can still see this, right? You can still go on the internet, look for a definition of lean, and the definition is going to be lean is focused on elimination of waste. And Six Sigma is focused on quality. You'll see this, all over the place. And the reason Taiichi Ohno wanted to promote that thinking was that if you're really convinced that lean is all about eliminating waste, then your efforts are going to be scattered, potentially, right? You're going to be eliminating waste here, eliminating waste there, kind of what was happening with this aerospace company. Now, if eliminating waste is not the central focus of lean, then what is? And Taiichi Ohno, in this same interview, explained that, think in terms of a river. Our goal at Toyota, the core, one of the core goals, of course, we have all kinds of principles, but a core goal is to reduce the time from receipt of our customer order to receipt of the cash. And there are a couple terms for that we use. One is called MCT, so manufacturing cycle time. And the other term is days to cash, DTC, days to cash. So receive the customer order, how long does it take to get paid, or how long does it take to finish that product? And that is their main goal, he explained in this interview. In other words, the word we use for that overall is flow, focused on the idea of flow as a core principle, or flow manufacturing. Now, that doesn't mean that 7S or eliminating waste or SMED or any of these tools are not valid. not important, but they're important from the point of view of improving that flow, right? Improving the flow. So if you have long changeovers, that's an obstacle to flow. If you have waste in your system, that's an obstacle to flow. If you have a low 5S environment, that's an obstacle to flow, et cetera, but not as a goal simply by itself. Okay? So I'm just going to put a couple of these sticky notes up here. We have this aerospace company. We talked about that. And did Toyota fool us? So I'm just giving you a quick summary of that article, but you can find it easily on Google and read more about it. Now, related to flow, then one more comment, and then we'll get into some more detail. But I don't know if you remember this. If you've been in the lean world, you probably and done some reading, you probably have seen this cartoon, and it's a picture of a lake or body of water, and there's usually a boat, floating in the water, and then underneath the water are rocks. And this is usually used to illustrate what happens when you reduce inventory. So the water's the inventory, and when you reduce inventory in your system, then the rocks that used to be under the water, you could sail over on top of them, the rocks start getting exposed. That's the analogy. So reducing inventory could be a way of stressing the system or a form of continuous improvement, because until problems are exposed, then they tend to be hidden and you're not aware of them. But as you reduce inventory, then the rocks get exposed, and then you have to do something about it, right? You don't want to run into the rocks, so you have to address those, essentially their problems, and you do that through Kaizen. Okay, so that's the cartoon. Now, the problem with that analogy is that the lake is not flowing, right? The lake is kind of a fixed body of water. So if we wanted to extend that image a little bit further, then instead of using a lake as an analogy, we would use a river, a stream. So think of a fast-running mountain stream, and there are rocks in that stream. So the rocks could be the same rocks as before. The rocks are the problems, or rocks are things that are getting in the way of the flow, or could be. And so those rocks are still the same problems we need to resolve, but now we're thinking of a stream as opposed to a lake or a body of water. Now, there's still a problem with that, though. Still a problem with the stream, and that's this. And this is explained in the article, Did Toyota Fool the Lean Community? The problem with the stream analogy is this. Over the years, say over the past 100 years, the percentage of fixed costs, of overhead, has grown. So if we go back to 1918 compared to 2018, in a typical manufacturing company, the percentage of overhead has grown tremendously. Labor used to be a much bigger percentage of the product cost, and now overhead is a much bigger percent of the product cost. So basically you have materials, you have overhead, you have labor. Today, labor is the smallest piece of that product cost, whereas in the past, that was not necessarily the case. So the problem with a stream is this. Even if you improve the flow, we're talking about business strategy here, but even if you improve the flow, if your stream is not big enough, you won't have enough volume of water or business to really cover your fixed costs. So part of the business strategy, part of the lean business strategy, if you will, in the year 2018, needs to include some strategy for growth. Because if you don't have enough volume, you don't have enough market share, then your profitability is going to be less because you're not covering those fixed costs. So instead of a stream, what we're talking about here in terms of our water analogies is a river. So you want, ideally it's like the Amazon or Mississippi River, but a bigger river where you have more volume, and therefore you can cover your fixed costs, and then you're actually able to really become profitable. Difficult to do it if you're just a tiny mountain stream, given the fact that overhead costs are so much higher typically than they were in the past. Of course, your actual results will vary. So I'm not talking about your company, but in general, this is true. All right. So lake, stream, and river, and what we're shooting for here is kind of a river analogy as much as anything. Okay. So what about the lean tools then? since we're talking about flow, what about the traditional lean tools? So we've got, I just made a short list of them here, but 5S is one of them, right? Organization and housekeeping is a typical lean tool that we look at. And then we've got SMED, single minute exchange of dies. SMED was one of the first things that Toyota started working on back in probably the 1950s, because SMED, or rather changeover, is a big obstacle to flow, right? Because nothing's flowing when you're doing a changeover. That machine is stopped. So SMED, or single minute exchange of dies, as a way of reducing changeover time, it became a major tool back in the early days. Then we have standard work. So again, obviously standard work is a foundational concept, lean concept. Whether you're lean or not lean, you still need to document your processes and train people to do that. But lack of standard work, it can be a big obstacle to flow, because it has an impact on quality, it has an impact on repeatability, it has an impact on variability. So there are a lot of reasons why standard work is extremely important. Kanban. So Kanban, another famous lean technique, but keep in mind that Kanban is a tool, and the best Kanban would be no Kanban, right? Not need Kanban, to have a one-by-one production, so we could hand off material one by one and not need Kanban at all. But for the moment, Kanban is a tool that we use for many of our items in a lean environment to assist in the material flow piece of it. What else do we have? 7 ways. So the famous 7 ways. Again, the 7 ways from a flow perspective are important because these are things that restrict the flow. Excessive movement, waste in the process, excess inventory. All the traditional 7 ways are obstacles to our flow. And that's why we're interested in them. If we're interested in improving the flow, reducing that manufacturing cycle time. Okay, so we're not throwing away, in other words, we're not throwing away any of the classic lean tools, but we're looking at them through the lens of how do those wastes, how do those opportunities for improvement affect the flow, which is, remember, the definition of flow was the time from receipt of customer order to ideally the receipt of cash. And by the way, I've seen companies where the longest part of that cycle, the receipt of the customer order to the receipt of cash, was not building the product. It was just receiving the cash. The accounts receivable piece of it was longer than the manufacturing cycle. So that's why we don't want to leave that out and just say, receipt of order to completing the product, because you could have a big piece of time remaining after that. Okay, so here's a free gift. I think we have Ian. So what we're going to offer you is for you to download a copy of our book. So I think you can see it here. So the Complete Guide to Mixed Model Line Design. This is for sale on Amazon. If you want a hard copy, it's available on Amazon for $50, I think. That's what we're asking. But you can download a copy of it. This is not a report. This is a full book. And you can download a PDF copy of this. So that's our first gift to you. And this is important because this really documents what we're going to talk about next. We're going to talk about the methodology for designing a flow value stream or a flow process. So this is an important resource for you. And since you are getting the book, I'm not going to be spending too much time in this webinar, nor do we have the time to talk about all the details that are included in here, but now you have it. And it'll walk you through a step-by-step methodology for designing a flow value stream. And it can be applied to manufacturing, but it could be applied to hospitals, as long as the conditions are right. And it can be applied to non-manufacturing value streams, like administrative processes, as long as you have repeating work. It's a little bit hard to apply for something you only do once. But if you're doing something on a regular basis, the same type of work, then you can put it into a flow and really get some huge benefits. Okay, so let us start with the first part of this actual methodology that I want to share. I'm just going to share this with you at a high level, but it's called mixed model line design. So when we think of flow, we think of two aspects. We think of the work that needs to get done, so workflow, And then we think of the materials that are needed, and we call that material flow. And they're related, obviously. They need to work hand in glove, but they're also quite different, right? Separate. So when we form Kaizen teams or Kaikaku teams, these are two teams, right, that are focused on different areas. So I'm going to start with the first one, with the workflow, and just give you a high-level view of what's involved. And you'll see this in the book. Okay, you'll see this in the book itself, going through the steps. But here are the steps. Typically, if we had an opportunity for improvement, let's say you have an assembly line, the most classic example, and you know it's underperforming and you want to improve it, and you want to apply the Kaikaku approach, then what you're really talking about is starting over, right, with a blank sheet of paper and redesigning this process. I understand that's not always possible, and I'll talk in a little while about how we might break a big project like that into pieces so you can kind of do it incrementally over time. But philosophically, we're talking about a blank sheet of paper and redesigning based on these lean principles. And that's the best choice if you can actually do that. So what's involved is this. Number one, you need to have a plan. So there's a chapter in this book on creating a master plan. The who, what, when, where, how. How long should it take? That depends on the size, right? The size and scope. But we're talking probably months and not days, right, to do this. So it's going to be a bigger project. And if it's a very big project, then it could be even more than months. I mean, some projects go into over a year to do this, to do it right. So we have a plan that makes sense, right? And part of that plan is assessment. So where are we today? We know it's going to be an improvement, but you need to be able to prove it. You need to have the data. So we typically do an assessment or a measurement of where we are today. And we call that the current state. So if you're familiar with value stream mapping, that would be something you could do to document the current state of your environment, and including metrics like that: manufacturing cycle time. What is it today? And then we can measure it when we made these changes. So we have a plan. Step two, we need data. So the kind of data we need is industrial engineering type of data. And that means we need to have products. And those products could be discrete products, or it could be base models plus options, or could be highly customized products. It could be spare parts if we're building them on the same line, replacement parts. Those are products also. So we need to have a list of every different type of product we'd like to run on the same line. And hence comes the term mixed model. So we're talking about a production line or a value stream that can produce a variety of different products on the same line efficiently. So we need products, we need processes. So what are the processes on a value stream? Those are typically the boxes on a value stream map. Those are the different processes. We need to know those. We need to know the volumes. So for every product, what's our anticipated capacity requirements? When we add it all up, all of the different products, that's the total capacity of this line. And that's related to customer demand, and it's related to looking in the future. What does the future, hold for us? The ability to look in the future, is determined by the nature of our markets. How far ahead can we look? Sometimes we can look actually pretty far into the future, to set this capacity goal for our design. And sometimes we can't. For example, cell phones, if I'm trying to, anticipate what the future demand is for these things, then typically, I should probably put this on mute too, shouldn't I? If we're talking about cell phones, then probably you're not able to look into the future too far, because the technology is changing so quickly, different models are changing so quickly. Other types of products, you could look 1, 2, 3, 4, sometimes up to 10 years to anticipate the demand. So we need to have those things. Next thing we need is process times. So we need to know the work content times to do some calculations. So for every process and every product, how long does it take? And what are those detailed steps? So we're talking here about the need for standard work. And in terms of the time, if you don't already have this, this is the most time-consuming piece, is documenting at a detailed level the standard work definition for every product and every process. And if you add up the times for a product and process, that gives us a total time, and we're going to need that to do some calculations. All right? So we've got products, times, volumes, mix and volume for each of those individual models, and how those processes are related. So sometimes we call that a routing or a flow definition. And if we have all that information, then we're ready to go to the next step. And by the way, the same data conveniently is what we need for simulation modeling. So if you're interested in simulation modeling, it's very similar data that you would need to input into a simulation model. Now, once we have that data, we do some calculations, and we're going to calculate something called takt time, the rhythm or beat of each process, not by product, but by process. So spoiler alert, a product does not have a takt time. The product has work content time, but the process will have a takt time, a rhythm or beat. That's the sum of all the volumes going through that process, right? So processes have takt times, products do not. And once we have the takt time and we have actual time, we can calculate resources. That means to meet this certain volume, how many people do I need? So we're going to do some math. Now, those of you that love math, good news. This is a data-driven, mathematically based methodology. Those of you that don't like math so much, don't worry. It's like really easy. This is arithmetic as much as anything. So if you know how to multiply and divide and add and subtract, you're going to be in good shape. So we do some calculations, and we're going to get from that the calculation of how many people and how many machines I need for every process, right? That's going to go into our eventual layout. Now, when we have that, once we have that number, we know how many people, how many potential workstations we're going to need if we're doing work in an assembly line kind of environment. But we have to take that total work content and allocate it. So if we calculate we need 10 people, that would be 10 workstations. We're going to have to take the time to do the work for each model and divide it by 10, or divide it into 10 hopefully equal pieces to allocate to those 10 stations. So this is what we call line balancing or workstation definition. And that's a big chunk of work as well. That takes some time to level the workload across those 10 stations so we can achieve good flow, so that when the unit goes down the line, the time it takes at each station is more or less the same as best we can. So that's a workstation definition. And we also need, we're ready at this point to do something called conceptual line design. So we're going to do a layout, but we're not firing up our CAD system yet. We're going to do a layout of that total flow. And that could be typically a main flow or main process. And then you could actually have feeder lines coming in. So sub-assemblies that are built in parallel and are consumed on that line. So your layout could end up looking kind of like a fishbone diagram, with a main spine, the main flow, and then spines coming out, which represent the sub-assemblies. And a sub-assembly could have another sub-assembly. So it could get quite involved. But we want to create a conceptual, that is a block layout of how things are going to flow, so we get an idea of where things are connected and what the signaling mechanism is going to be to create this river system, basically. So back to the idea of flow. We're going to design the river with tributaries. So we may have tributaries coming in, and we want to try to connect everything together as directly as possible. Because if we don't, then that's an obstacle to flow. For example, if we have a process that needs to go outside processing, that's an obstacle to flow because we're adding days typically of lead time to that. So sometimes we can't avoid that. Sometimes we have to do that, but that's one of the things we try to design out if we can while we're designing this flow process. Now, once we have a conceptual line design, now we're ready for the final line design. And that is a CAD-based, detailed, dimensionally correct layout that we're going to eventually implement. And then beyond that, now we're into implementation phase. We're talking about this line design roadmap where we actually have to make it happen. So everything up to the CAD layout has basically been planning, but now we have to physically make it happen, and then we have to manage that. So there are a lot of details beyond that. So I'm just giving you a very high-level view of what's involved, but just keep in mind, we're trying to design a river system, and we're trying to connect all the work together as directly as possible. That's why lean companies tend to be more vertically integrated so that work does not have to go outside. And we've seen this at Toyota Material Handling. They didn't start out that way, but over the years, they've pulled more and more processes in-house. So now they're more and more, as every year goes by, they're more and more integrated internally to be able to support this kind of river concept. Now, that's mixed model line design. And again, this book that you can download covers all of this in excruciating detail, what you need to do at each step. Now, the other part of it is the material flow. So mixed model material management is the kind of the term we're using. And I'll put this on the board. And what we're discussing here again is the work that needs to happen in parallel with the line design, probably by another team, to design the material delivery system. And to be honest with you, problems that companies have today are, I think, more often related to the material delivery system or the supply chain part of running a manufacturing factory than the actual workflow. So when we interview people on the factory floor, what are your biggest challenges? It's oftentimes something related to materials. It's not, we don't know how to do the work. We don't have good flow. People are not trained. That's typically not the issue. The issue is we don't have the parts we need to do the work. And so we're always doing a lot of juggling and changing our production plan because we didn't realize it, but we're out of one item or another, those kind of issues. So when we're talking about the process of mixed model material management, we're talking about starting with, again, a data-driven approach. So we have a plan, just like the other team, and then we're starting right off square one, step one with data collection, and that takes the form in the world of materials of a tool called Plan for Every Part. So Plan for Every Part is a tool that we would use to pull all the information for every part number, whether it's manufactured or purchased, that we're going to need in this target area, right, in this design, and allow us to pull all that information that we need for each part number into a single view. Usually that's an Excel spreadsheet, but it doesn't have to be. But the point is that we don't have the part-related information scattered all over the place the way it typically is in an MRP system. In most, but is not easily seen because the item master file has some of the information, and the vendor or supplier module has other information, and the inventory management module has other information, and we can't really see it all in one place. So Plan for Every Part, which oftentimes is an extract or download from your main system, intends to address that need. And when you can put everything together into a really flexible environment like an Excel spreadsheet, then you can learn a lot. You can get a lot done. Now, ideally, Plan for Every Part is not something you just do for a design and then you throw it away. Ideally, it's something that becomes part of your everyday discipline of managing materials. But you do have this challenge. If you are using Excel, then how do you keep it synchronized? Because Excel is not your main data. Your main data is your ERP, MRP system. So how do you keep those two in sync? That's sometimes a challenge. And there are software companies out there that are trying to address that, right, to keep them synchronized. So when you make a change in your Plan for Every Part, it gets reflected in the so-called main, or the real database. So that's an important consideration. So once you have a Plan for Every Part, then there are all these, things you can do with it, including, and maybe the most important, calculating inventory quantities. So you're going to use this to calculate either your Kanban quantities or your target inventory quantities. Even if you're not using Kanban, you're using sequence delivery or one-by-one delivery of parts, you still need to do this kind of analysis. And sometimes companies find that by sorting this kind of calculation and looking at the biggest variances between what they have today and what the target or the goal of inventory is, find the ones that have the biggest difference, they can achieve big inventory reductions by just focusing on a few things. The 80-20 rule is sometimes becomes shockingly apparent when you're able to use a flexible tool like that and actually see those sometimes relatively few items where you have a big gap between what you actually have and what you actually need. And then you work to reduce that inventory. So that's sometimes a real eye-opener that I've seen. The other thing that we're going to use Plan for Every Part for is to establish the correct container sizes. So containerization is a whole kind of a this team. So proper containerization, standardization of containers, and optimizing and hopefully reducing container sizes for the most part. Getting away from, in the old school material delivery was deliver a whole Contico, a whole huge pallet load of material to the line, because then you don't have to replenish it very often. That's old thinking. New thinking is water spider or water strider. Carry light loads and deliver them often. Okay, move quickly and carry a light load, just like the insect, zooming around on the surface of a pond. That's the approach we want to take. And this is what we see in really lean companies that are doing well. For example, Toyota Material Handling has a delivery cycle. This isn't secret information, right? This is public information. But they have a delivery cycle on their factory floor of 37 minutes. That means every 37 minutes, a tugger is going to come by and be replenishing material in small quantities based on what was actually consumed. So most of those parts are under a Kanban control, but every 37 minutes. So the likelihood of running out of something in that environment is pretty low, because even if you're consuming material much more quickly than you'd planned, you've still got a delivery potential every 37 minutes. So this is one of the things that your team, your material management team will have to be discussing. So containerization, and then frequency of delivery and delivery routes. So there are a number of items that the team is going to be working on in parallel with the line design team. And of course, delivering material to the workstations is a hand in glove project for both teams, because we need to know what work is being done at each location in order to deliver the material that's required, right, at each location. So whole big fun project, and these two working together will deliver this kaikaku kind of approach, meaning an optimized line design. What we oftentimes say is, if you follow this methodology, follow this approach and do it right, then you're going to have pretty much an unbeatable design that's no one else in the world could actually do better in terms of performance, in terms of that manufacturing cycle time, in terms of quality, in terms of productivity. Now, sure, if there's a different process or someone comes up with some breakthrough new technology, that's different. But given a level playing field of similar technologies, similar processes, this will give you the best that's actually possible, because you're designing it based on actual engineering data and you're eliminating the waste at the design stage. I'll mention as a side comment, people have said from the Lean Design Institute, this was actually a comment by Jim Womack, who is I think is like the founder of the Lean Design Institute. He said, if you're doing too much Kaizen, that's kind of a red flag that your processes weren't designed properly to begin with. Because why should you have to be doing all these major Kaizen projects if that line design was good to begin with? Sure, continuous improvement, making small adjustments, but large Kaizen projects going on all over the place is a indication of lack of design up front. So that's why we're spending some time talking about this. Okay, so again, we don't have a book. We don't have a book on a mixed model material management yet. We have a draft of the book, and it's something we're working on. So we don't have something similar to this one that we can give you, but we will in the future. But that does exist. Now, let's just recap here. The no BS means we have a data-driven method, right? No BS is data-driven. We're using data to do this work. So a Kaizen event with no data is a BS Kaizen event, we're saying. I'm not trying to be too harsh here, but I think you can kind of agree with that. And then the no hoping is we have metrics. And there are a lot of different metrics we might want to have, but one of the principal metrics is this metric that I've mentioned quite a few times, manufacturing cycle time, or DTC, days to cash. And I like the days to cash measurement better, because like I told you, there are cases where that's the biggest chunk of time, is the accounts receivable collection. Unless you include that in your metric, then you're kind of losing visibility of that piece. And you can do all this work, but until you get paid, really the loop isn't closed, right? The issue's not closed until you get the money. Get the money. Okay, now we're reaching the end here. I think we're doing pretty well on time. We're 48 minutes into it, so we'll just wrap this up with some kind of concluding remarks. So, need to think kaikaku. You probably need to think bigger, redesign. But I understand, appreciate that the opportunity to build a new factory or start with a blank sheet of paper is not always very possible, right? Not very practical. So the question is this: can we apply the kaikaku approach or the mixed model line design, mixed model material management approach, but then implement it in pieces more along the lines of a Kaizen type of effort? And the answer is sure you can. It's not ideal, but you can. But there are a couple things you need to be careful of. Number one, I would suggest that you design the kaikaku target area as a total design, not design it in pieces. Design it as an effort, right? Even though you're not going to be able to implement it. Because remember, the design up to the CAD layout, the design is on paper, right? So you haven't actually changed the physical world yet. So do the design as a total design. That way, you're not having to start and stop, and you're consistent, in your approach across the entire the value stream, whatever value stream you're looking at. So that's important. But can you implement it in chunks? Yes, in pieces. The answer is yes, but you have to be a little bit cautious because your new line ideally is going to be like a racehorse, and your old line is going to be like a donkey. And so if you're not careful in how you implement this, you could end up putting the donkey in front of the racehorse. The racehorse wants to run, right? The racehorse wants to run. The donkey wants to walk. And if you put a racehorse behind the donkey, then that racehorse is going to be blocked, right? You're not going to be able to take advantage of that. So generally speaking, the racehorse wants to go at the end. So if we're talking about taking a project like this, designing it correctly, and then implementing it in pieces or phasing it in pieces, you would phase it in logical chunks starting at the end, right? Start at the end and then move your way upstream. And you're going to have more inventory, right? More inventory in the system doing that than you would have if you were able to implement this as a single project, but that's okay. So you just have to take a logical piece and bring that live, one at a time, but starting at the end and working your way upstream. Last comment in terms of future Kaizen focus, because again, I hope you haven't gotten the impression that I'm saying that Kaizen efforts to do 5S or eliminate waste in one area or another are bad things. But what I guess I'm suggesting to you is that those kind of efforts should tie in some way to MCT, to manufacturing cycle time metric, or to days to cash. If you've got a Kaizen project, Kaizen event, let's say, I'm not talking about small ideas here, the quick and easy Kaizen, but a Kaizen event, if you don't have any link in that event to manufacturing cycle time, then you might want to look at some other opportunity. Now, what you do in that Kaizen event, sure, it could be focused on SMED, 7S, eliminating waste in one way or another, standardization, all those good things. But if there's no connection between that and improving MCT, you might want to pick another area. And that can happen very easily, actually. Even though you're potentially eliminating a lot of waste, if that waste is in a part of the flow that's not on the critical path, then you're going to have zero impact on MCT by focusing your time and money and attention on that area. And so I would be cautious about that, because for sure you're not going to be improving MCT. And when you don't improve MCT, then your benefits are going to be less overall. It's going to be harder to see that on your profit and loss statement. Your CEO is maybe going to wonder where all that effort went when MCT doesn't change. But on the other hand, when MCT goes down, there are a host of benefits of doing that. Work in process inventory is going to go down. Your customer response time just went down. Your customer lead time, quoted lead time, could actually go down. Your productivity probably improved. There are a host of benefits of reducing MCT. So that's my final comment. Last thing, can I have, Amanda says, can I have the book link again? So Ian, if you're listening. Last bonus. If you're interested in this topic of mixed model line design and mixed model material management, we've partnered with Toyota over the last few years, and they have been open to having us come in and teach these subjects at their plant in Columbus, Indiana. And they just do it a few times a year. And we're not teaching them. I think they already know this stuff, but they're willing to open their doors and have us come in, us Leonardo Group come in and teach these subjects because they believe in them. It's what they're doing themselves. Maybe not exactly the way we're teaching it, but pretty darn close. In fact, Toyota is comfortable enough with what we teach that we've partnered with them. We've partnered with them on projects with other companies. So they're willing to open their doors and invite you, if you're interested, invite us to come in and teach these subjects. And included in that experience would be some plant tours. This was Assembly Plant of the Year. This is in Columbus, Indiana, a few years ago. So this is really a gold standard. In our mind, this is a gold standard for the kind of things we're talking about here. So a couple plant tours plus time spent with their management, a chance to ask questions that are Toyota specific, but also learn mixed model line design. So if this is of interest to you, you can read more about it on our website, but you can also take advantage of an extra. Right now we have in effect a $300 early bird for another few weeks, but another $200 discount for attending this webinar on top of that. The next one, by the way, mixed model line design is on August 7th, I believe it is, August 7th, so a little more than a couple months from now in Columbus, Indiana. And then in November, we have the mixed model material management class. That's the same place, but different subject. So again, I thought I'd mention that to you. You can read more about it on our website, what the agenda is. And Kaikaku in chunks. I'm forgetting my little messages here. Focus on MCT, yes. And then what I'm just telling you about here. So final bonus, $300 plus $200. So find out about it on our website. We give you the day-to-day, day-by-day agenda and all the things you're going to learn and what you get. But check it out. And if you can make it, we'll look forward to seeing you there. So with that, I'm sorry I haven't had a chance. I've just been too busy blabbing to look at your comments, but I'll go back over them and see if I can respond to them individually. But with that, I'll let you go. 11:56, so a couple minutes early if we wanted to shoot for an hour. So again, thank you for participating, and we'll do this again. Bye now.